It's the TMZ Behind the Bar podcast with the TMZ lawyers, Jason Beckerman and Derek Kaufman.
Welcome, everyone, to the Behind the Bar podcast, where each week we bring our perspective to the biggest stories in celebrity news. I'm Jason Beckerman.
And I'm Derek Kaufman.
So, Derek, this week's topic was inspired by someone who has never listened to a single episode of our podcast.
Who would that be?
My 9-year-old daughter, Kate, who a couple of weeks ago, actually a couple of days ago, came home in tears from school saying that she had been told by somebody in a class that if Donald Trump is elected president, he is going to paint the White House pink. Now, I don't know where she got this. I assured her it wasn't true. But
Why was it so distressing, though? Isn't pink a great color?
No, it's the White House.
Oh, okay.
Aren't you aware of this? And so she was legitimately upset about her, and I assured her that it wasn't true. But now that he's been elected, I'm actually rethinking. Is it conceivable that she got the true information from sort of the jungle gym outside of the elementary school?
Let me put her mind at ease.
Please do.
Kate, listen up.
Yeah, I'm not letting her listen. So
okay,
just so you know.
Jason will summarize this later. So the official color of the White House is actually whisper white. I just wanted to start
is that right?
with that.
How far back does that go?
It's called
to the beginning.
It goes back very, very far, actually. So
you can tell I just stumped Derek with a question about how
you did
far back
kind of stump me, but I want to. Okay, so it's called Whisper White, and there's actually a ton of it on there. Something like 598 gallons or something like that. There's a story that the White House is white for a reason. That when the White House was burned during the War of 1812,
right,
they had to cover the burn marks with white paint.
Well, was it not white before that?
Yes, it was white before that, so it's apocryphal. But I like that story, so I wanted to lead with the apocryphal story. It actually is just a lime-based whitewash that was applied in 1798 when they first built the house, and it was to protect the stone. The stone was kind of porous, and so they put this lime-based whitewash on it, and it just happened to be white. They didn't intend this to be called the White House at the time. It ended up, it was to help the stone from freezing and cracking and so forth. It was applied again in 1818, and the nickname stuck, and the guy who gave it the nickname, Teddy Roosevelt.
They gave it the name of the White House?
That's right. Before then, it was just
mansion,
the executive
right?
mansion.
Oh, fascinating.
And it happened to be white.
I am honestly stunned. I just learned something right now.
Did I impress you? Okay, so now it's the official name ever since 1901. Teddy bully pulpit kind of guy says it's the White House.
So my question then is, if a president who might be an eccentric, let's call him whatever you want to call him.
Could he change it?
Could he come in and say, you know what, Whisper White's lovely and all, but I prefer, Pink Panther pink?
I want to say he or she would have a hell of a time doing so, because there are serious protections for the White House in its current incarnation. So the new administration will have a lot of discretion. The new family is going to move in, discretion with respect to how they decorate on the inside, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But with respect to the outside of the house, the Committee for the Preservation of the White House and the White House Historical Association are these two bodies that protect the way the White House looks and the way it's structured. And so doing dramatic things like that has to go through a serious process. No one's ever tried that I could find to change the color of the White House because of its name.
But it's so fascinating.
Could an iconoclast kind of get in there and try to convince this committee? It's possible. I have to say it's possible.
Forget about convincing the committee. So Donald Trump is two things. He is a maverick, and that's what people love about him. He is a man who is his own boss and knows what he wants.
Makes John McCain look tame.
Right.
Yes.
And he's also a builder. And we all know that builders will, without waiting for permits, will sometimes go and do something because they know it's harder to unravel what's already been done than to ask permission in the first place. Easier to ask forgiveness than ask permission.
Right.
So he might just get a bunch of guys out there one night and just start lathering up, right?
Oh, you mean just in the dark of night, just assemble some builders and painters and come morning, you have a gold leaf White House.
No, pink.
Oh, pink.
Which part of pink?
I know that was Kate's concern, but wouldn't Trump go gold? Trump would go gold.
He would probably go gold.
I think he has a better chance of sort of acid staining a tea into the White House lawn. I think that's within the realm of possibility, but I don't think he could get the house to be painted. There's a lot of house, too. There's a 132-room house. He's going to get a budget with his family to kind of redecorate. I don't think he's going to want to spend a lot of money on trying to paint the White House.
So we were talking.
Seems like a long shot.
It does. We were talking just beforehand about the rules that govern the interior of the White House, and I know that you told me it is like layers upon layers of rules and regulations.
There's a lot of bureaucracy. Now, they do have a lot of discretion with the residents. So it's a massive building. So the upper residences where they actually live, the living quarters, they can do a lot of stuff. But all the famous stuff, the green room, the Lincoln bedroom, you got to get through the curator. And the committee is tough.
Well, instead of fledgling through this, let's bring on our guest.
Let's do it.
So, Derek, you and I can sort of play around with these topics all we want, but I thought it would be a good idea to bring in somebody who actually knew what they were talking about when it comes to this. So we invited Kate Anderson Brower onto the call. Kate, welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So Kate Anderson Brower is a #1 New York Times bestselling author of The Residence, which looked at the inner workings of the White House, the backstairs version. And then in April of this year, she published First Woman, which I love this quote, Kate. It's a news-making look at the true modern power brokers at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the First Ladies from Jackie Kay to Michelle Obama. So, Kate, can't imagine a better person to talk to about what we're going to see when it comes to a transition of power from Michelle Obama to Melania Trump.
Well, I think it will be sort of interesting to watch Melania Trump take up this role. She is will be the first lady to be married to someone who has not held elective office since Mamie Eisenhower. And, President Eisenhower was the commander of the Allied forces, of course, in World War II. So, he had a great deal of responsibility in that role. But this job is always really difficult for every first lady. There is nothing in the Constitution that describes your job. You're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. You don't get paid. Michelle Obama had to leave a very lucrative job in Chicago where she was making more than Barack Obama was as state senator. And, I just think that the transition's always hard.
One of the things, this is apropos of nothing, but I was looking up little trivia facts about First Lady earlier today. She will be the first foreign-born First Lady, and Derek loves trivia. The first foreign-born First Lady since Abigail Adams, which I thought was kind of fascinating.
Oh, wow.
Well, since Louisa Adams.
Louisa Adams.
Yes.
Oh, John Quincy Adams' wife, not John Adams' wife. Got it. Thank you for the correction.
The daughter-in-law of Abigail Adams.
So one of the sort of, and I guess this is probably a sexist tinge to this whole thing, but one of the primary obligations that we've always watched First Ladies undertake is to sort of decorate the interior of the White House, right? There's a time-honored tradition.
Sure.
That
Jackie Kennedy famously.
I'm sure Lady Bird sort of had her things.
Nancy Reagan hooked it up a
Nancy-
little bit.
Lady Bird couldn't, because anything Jackie did, no one else could touch for decades.
Oh.
She get in so much trouble.
Because that'd be really gauche to do after.
But
Yeah, it was bad. Lady Bird even had their dogs even went to the bathroom on the carpet, and they didn't change the carpet. So when she handed it over,
Wow.
That is a tidbit
to
right
Pat
there.
Nixon, the White House was a mess.
that's funny because actually Lyndon famously pooped with the door open.
Every
so-
story about LBJ has to do with defecating.
defecation.
It just turns out that way.
Which actually, that's a great point. So that brings us to sort of the main topic we want to hit is what are the first couples? What leeway do they have to decorate the interior of the White House? Now, Lady Bird couldn't do anything because of the
unpleasantness,
and just having come after the Jackie O and the death of her husband and the whole thing. But what is Melania going to confront in terms of limitations, or Donald, if they want to decorate the White House?
Yeah, this was my question. So the big T, he puts the T on everything.
Yeah.
Could he swap out some of the seals on the carpets for just the gigantic T, or maybe sort of gold leaf on the crown molding?
Change the Truman balcony just to a gold lame kind of T thing?
Really tasteful and not garish at all. Stuff like that.
Thankfully, no. I mean, what they can do in the second and third floors, the private living quarters, the bedrooms, the sitting rooms, where Barron will sleep, they have an interior decorator who comes in with the first family, and they can do a lot in there. But even up on the second floor, there are rooms like the Yellow Oval Room, the Lincoln Bedroom, the Queen's Bedroom. These are rooms that are, historically preserved for the country. And so if they want to change something in those three rooms, they have to get approval by committee for the preservation of the White House, which is overseen by the Office of the Curator. And these people are not messing around. They do not like to see change. So he could get the soaps emblazoned with a T or something like that, but it's not as though he cannot change anything on the state floor, the green room, the red room, except they can do a lot of changes in the Oval Office. I mean, every president does something different in the Oval.
Now, there's a lot of bedrooms. Could he call one of the bedrooms the Omarosa Bedroom? I know the Lincoln Bedroom is sacrosanct, but there's 132 rooms.
The Queen's
in this
Bedroom
place.
we don't really need
the
anymore.
The Queen's maybe not so much, but that wouldn't be beyond the realm of possibility, right?
I mean, nothing is beyond the realm of possibility anymore. So, I suppose so. But it's interesting. Each of the rooms, each of the bedrooms, and there are a lot of them on the third floor, too, they're actually numbered just like in a hotel. So the maids at the White House will say, room 332 has got a bed that's really hard to make because it's a big giant sleigh bed. And so they do call them by the numbers. But, yeah, you can nickname a room, but it won't really mean anything in the future.
So speaking of the staff, you brought up the maid. I know you just recently did an article with Vanity Fair discussing how the resident staffers felt about the prospect of a Trump presidency now that it's coming to pass. Well, what do you think sort of the feeling on the ground is there within the White House?
I just talked to a couple staffers this morning to check back in with them, and the feeling is one of intense nervousness. I mean, a lot of the staff, they're African American and Hispanic.
Wow.
And this goes beyond party, the staffer told me. They're worried about this individual. So, they stay on from one administration to the next. They're incredibly loyal to the White House and the presidency. They have served Bush's, Clinton's. They were actually looking forward to serving Hillary Clinton because a lot of them were the same. 3 of the butlers on the second floor, there's 6 butlers who served the first family, would have been the same butlers who served the Clintons in the 90s. And that would have been special for them. And, one staffer told me the transition to a Hillary presidency would have been a piece of cake. And he said to me, quote, I hope my friends get some rest. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Now, I will say, from what we've heard anecdotally from the staff that's close to Donald Trump, notwithstanding the comments that he's made, the horrific statements that he's made about Mexicans and others, I think he is well liked by the people close to him.
That's what I've heard, is that he's the type of guy who is kind of gregarious and you want to be around, notwithstanding his public persona and the bravado, that he's actually somewhat palatable on an interpersonal basis.
Once the rapist comment is made, it's sort of hard to walk that back, I guess.
I would say impossible to walk it back, but yes, certainly difficult and awkward, yeah.
I hope that that's true. I think they're concerned that, he'll come in and bring his own cooks and maids to the White House and fire them all. And the bad part of working at the White House in that capacity is that you're a government staffer, but you can be hired or fired at the president's discretion. And there have been maids, for instance, who have been fired because they've been too nervous around the first family and, make it awkward for them.
All right, so give us a little bit of gossip here and sort of modern history. Who's the first lady liked most by the staff, and who's the first lady disliked most by the staff?
That's a really easy one because a person, they said Barbara Bush was the most beloved. And almost to a person, Nancy Reagan was very, very difficult.
Oh,
wow. This is sort of fascinating to me. Barbara does seem sort of lovely as a person. She's the matriarch of that family and sort of very professional and poised. But Nancy's a little shocking to me.
Nancy's shocking to me. I was gonna say
I was gonna go with Pat Nixon.
I think it would make it more difficult to have young children in the house, so you'd be dealing with the Obamas, Bush #2, Carter, obviously, but that's not the case with Nancy Reagan. The kids were long grown by then, but it seems like there was no correlation between kids in the house and how difficult they are.
She was just a perfectionist. That one cook told me if she asked for asparagus and you gave her green beans, you better have a good excuse because there'll be hell to pay. She's very particular. Even when she was eating alone with Ronnie, as she called him, she was. She wanted everything to be just so. And in a way, that's not bad.
Seems a little excessive, to be honest with you.
Well, it makes sense, though. Ronnie seemed, President Reagan seemed so affable. I could imagine him telling old Hollywood stories and just being a guy you want to be around, and her being sort of the perfectionist, keeping everything in order with the husband who who's sort of a little...
he was so affable that maids would see him coming and duck into rooms because they'd be cornered for 20 minutes hearing about his time as governor of California. He was really like that.
So I have I don't know how much more time we have, but I have actually sort of a more fun question, I think. Some people have put in the White House their personal stamp. I think my personal favorite president is Nixon, and he put in the bowling alley, and I think it's still decorated like the Nixon bowling alley, right? And I think Obama maybe repurposed the tennis courts to be a basketball court / tennis court. Yeah. What do people think Trump? I know he's a kind of a golf guy. Could he put sort of a golf course somewhere, a putting green?
Well, Clinton put in the putting green.
Oh, so that's already there.
I think so.
Yeah, I think golf makes sense. Eisenhower was always golfing, and the carpets in the Oval Office were all torn up because of it. And inside, he was golfing. So, I haven't really given that. That is a fun question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I know enough about what Donald Trump likes to do in his spare time.
Oh, we're going to learn quickly. I have a feeling he won't be shy about making some changes.
My last question for you is going back to decorating for a second, what kind of a budget will Melania Trump be given to change the interior of the White House?
Well, I believe off the top of my head, they have, I think, $200,000 that they can use as public funds. but they never use public funds because it looks
I
so
see.
bad.
Yeah.
So they'll either use their own money or they'll raise money. And, with the Obamas, they bought some things from anthropology because, some lower-end things because Michelle Obama got in some hot water hiring this high-end decorator who had ended up actually being an interior decorator for a big banker. And this was back during the housing crisis in 2009. And it looks bad. So I think that Melania would be really smart to not spend too much money.
I love how anthropology is low end. My house is mostly furnished by Craigslist. So the notion that to play it down a little bit, you go anthropology would make my wife's heart
I
sink.
have not bought anything from anthropology in a long time, but that is actually specifically the store that her decorator did go to.
That's why we love her, because she thought to do that. All right, Kate Anderson Brower, thank you so much again. The recent release is First Women. Before that, The Residents, and fascinating look inside the White House and at the First Ladies. Thanks so much.
This was amazing. Thanks for
Thanks,
joining
guys.
us. Jason, that was great. But my favorite tidbit about White House folklore is what presidents have put in there. And the best one, Kennedy put in his swimming pool, Nixon the bowling alley, as I said, Obama the basketball court. Jimmy Carter put solar panels on top of the White House. This was back in the 70s when it was really...
so Jimmy Carter.
And you know what happened after that? Reagan came in and stripped them off. We're back to fossil fuels, everyone. He didn't want the eyesore of solar energy on his White House.
Quick little anecdote.
Yeah.
I once worked for a individual. He's very conservative, and the building came in and put light switches that would they were auto light switches. They'd walk in, they'd flip on. If you walked out, they'd flip off, and they weren't very good, as these things never are. And so they'd go on or off at inopportune times, typically off when he was sort of working hard at his desk. And so the third day they're in, he'd been complaining about them, and then he gets up, takes a screwdriver, and rips the entire apparatus out of the wall for the entire light switch.
That seems extreme.
It was extremely extreme, as a matter of fact. But anyway, related to Ronald, I picture Ronald Reagan up there on the roof, sort of unscrewing solar panels.
Yeah, with his blue jeans on, just unscrewing them himself. Yeah.
So a couple other interesting tidbits that we wanted to talk about as we're looking at the transition of power from President Obama to President-elect Trump. What we're going to look at, Derek, I know one of the interesting things that you looked at was, what do presidents do post-presidency? What are sort of the more interesting activities that different presidents have engaged in?
Yeah, that's the big question. So Obama's leaving. He's termed out, right? And there are 4 ways that presidents leave, right? They either leave in a body bag, dead. They leave...
Few post activities then.
Exactly. 8 of those. So
Okay.
8 leave dead, either assassinated or die of natural causes. They resign. Only one of those.
Yep, Richie Dick.
We know that, Tricky Dick. Impeachment happened twice, but they didn't leave over the impeachment, Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton, or they term out in some way. They serve their term and they leave. 32 of those. So what do they do afterwards? What's Obama going to do? Because his legacy is now in Trump's hands. He's kind of probably
Harvey
pretty
has
depressed
always
over that.
theorized that Barack Obama is going to be
Run a movie studio.
Run a movie studio,
Yeah,
right.
going to greenlight some movies. Well, it would be unprecedented for that to happen, but a lot of cool things do happen. So there's actually an act about this, which I thought was very interesting. It's called the Former President's Act, and it was passed in 1958. This was right after Dwight D. Eisenhower, and they actually get a pension. It's only $25K a year at the time. It's been up to $161K a year.
Okay.
So you could just live on that.
Yeah.
You could just be the president, write your memoirs. Some of them just go off. They write their memoirs. They don't do much else. They get funding for an office and a staff for 4.5 years. So by statute, they can kind of transition to normal life and keep some of their staff and compile their memoirs and work on their library and so forth. So that's one thing. They have an actual stipend, which is kind of nice.
That's nice.
I thought that was kind of nice, a little pension. Most of them now get a library. The presidential library was established by FDR. He established the very first one because he had all this correspondence.
Now they all get a library in what a city of their choosing. President Obama has one that's going to be built in Chicago near Soldier Field.
And that preoccupies a lot of their time because these are beautiful. Nixon's is in Yorba Linda.
And
You've
they
got Simi Valley.
They hand curate the entire thing, right?
Yes, and at Reagan's you can go into Air Force One. He has the fuselage of Air Force One, so you can see what Air Force One looked like, which is a great treat. Truman continued the tradition after FDR, and now there's sort of 12 libraries. Even Hoover, predating FDR, got his library because he lived so long. Piece of trivia.
Yeah.
He lived a really long time in the Waldorf Astoria after he...
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, he lived until the 60s, and then he finally passed away, very, very old age. But what are the sort of coolest jobs? I was just sort of looking into this. The one that I think is for Obama, and you may disagree, is if Hillary had been elected, it was a possibility, but Supreme Court justice, right?
Yeah.
We have a precedent for this. Taft was appointed by Harding after his presidency to be Supreme Court justice, and he preferred the job. Now, you would think everything is a step down from the presidency, presidency? Not
Supreme
to
Court
Taft.
justice.
Taft loved it. He wanted to be a jurist, and I kind of get it. I would rather be a jurist than an executive.
Yeah, although once you've been an executive for that long, and the pressures of the office, and especially Taft, who was president, and then his old friend became his nemesis, and Theodore Roosevelt
That's true.
sort of pushed him out of the White House. It's kind of amazing that he would then take on such a high demand, high profile role. But he obviously enjoyed it. And he was an intellectual.
He was a super intellectual, and then you also get the benefit of the life tenure there. You're insulated from the political pressures, and I think Taft really enjoyed that.
So speaking of post-presidencies, one of the big things is, do these guys enjoy Secret Service protections? These had been the Secret Service protection during the Bush administration. They had signed a new law which had actually taken away Secret Service protection 10 years after a president was out of office. The idea being that these guys no longer retire into obscurity; they retire into a very lucrative book writing lives. And
the Clintons are worth maybe 9 figures.
That's
at
right,
this point,
and getting huge amounts of money to give speeches. So there was a recognition of that. But then President Obama in 2013, I believe, revoked that, signed a law revoking that, putting back in Secret Service protection for the life of the president. And I think that's okay.
I think it's worth the protection. I know it's something. The figure was something like $40,000 a day to have the Secret Service detail. I think it's worth it for our ex-president. Such an honored club, right?
I don't think it's $40,000 a day. That's for the sitting president.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, for the ex-president, they're giving a couple of guys for the rest of their life, and that's. I really don't have a problem with that. And
even though it comes out of taxpayers' money, I just think that's a pretty cool club to be in, and we should protect those guys. They live longer now.
And so there's an interesting wrinkle here in that typically somebody always when somebody is running for office, in this case Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, they're given a Secret Service protection during the pendency of the campaign. Once that campaign ends, the winner becomes president. They have the protection. The loser does not get that protection. They will get it for a very short period of time. The tradition is a week or 2 weeks, and then they become private citizens again, unless there's some reason to continue that. That's beyond the norm. They can certainly ask for it and will likely be granted an extended Secret Service protection. In this case, Hillary already has that protection, given that Bill has the protection. Although how much time they really spend in the same city or the same state together is probably not very much.
And do they have to protect Hillary to the same extent as the former president? They're really Bill's detail that she benefits from by being his wife.
They don't have to protect her to that extent.
She gets some Secretary of State detail? Do you get any?
I don't believe there's a post-Secretary of State. But again, she's now worth 8 to 9 figures.
Yeah.
So 8 to 9 figures, as if that's a small gap.
She can hire Kim Kardashian's old guy.
No, she can't afford that.
Oh, okay.
It's too expensive. So that I thought was interesting. Derek, one thing I know you love is White House portraiture.
I do. I love White House portraiture. You want to talk a little bit about it?
Go for
You'll
it.
indulge me? Okay, so White House portraiture, I'm just endlessly curious about sort of all of those portraits that get put up. And it was actually the origins of the tradition are pretty interesting. Gilbert Stuart painted the first one. He painted of Washington. He's a very famous portrait artist. Sometimes that portrait is part of the legend of the White House, right? Because in the War of 1812, the Brits burned down the White House, and Dolly Madison saved nothing but the Gilbert Stuart portrait of George Washington, which is a very special moment in American history. I don't get choked up too much, but the thought of the First Lady running in, not grabbing the china, but grabbing the Gilbert Stuart portrait and running around. So anyway, now they can sometimes be photos. The tradition has sort of lived on, but I thought there were a couple interesting stories. I want to talk about Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt is cantankerous, right? He's sort of the bully, really cared about how he looked and always wanted to look very manly. He had a lot of photos of him hunting and so forth. He showed mercy to a bear that became the teddy bear and so forth. He had his painted, and someone in his family said, this makes you look like a weakling.
Oh.
And we should really get this done. He tore it down and said, I need a new one. And the first one was painted by this guy, Theobald Charltran, and he said, this one makes me look weak. He had John Singer Sargent, very famous portrait artist, repaint one, and John Singer Sargent just followed him around the White House and waited for him to look really tough and found one. And the one that is actually of John Singer Sargent does make him look like a manly dude.
Sure does.
Like that guy from the
famous
museum.
picture, right.
Bill Clinton is the only president to have his portrait painted by an African-American, Simi Knox. Every other one is painted by some white dude. Just thought you might want to know that.
Has there ever been a female portrait artist?
That's a good question, and I'm not prepared for it. You have stumped me. JFK's portrait was painted after his death. He's the only posthumous one. So they painted it after his death. The pose was, this is a famous one where he's looking down. He looks sort of pensive.
Yes.
You may have seen it where he's
Arms
standing
across,
up.
yeah.
This one is, the pose was based on Teddy Kennedy's look while at JFK's funeral.
Oh, interesting.
They modeled it after his brother's grieving. And one more, my favorite one.
Yep.
There's only one portrait of an American president who's rocking a sword.
Oh.
Do you know him?
I'm going to go back. I'm going to say somebody, U.S. Grant.
Not a bad guess. That he's a military man. It's actually Zachary Taylor, another military hero of the Mexican-American War.
That's right.
He's got a full cavalry sword.
Oh,
and
nice.
I thought that was one of the coolest ones I'd seen. But that's all I got on portraiture.
That is fascinating stuff. Thanks so much. Thanks again to Kate Anderson-Brower for helping us out with this great discussion. We will see you again next week. Remember, guys, tune in to the Behind the Bar podcast in your iTunes store or on YouTube, and also email us suggestions.
At TMZ Behind the Bar?
We can't rely on my daughter to suggest all the topics for our podcast. So,
that's right.
So hit us with some great topics. We've gotten some terrific suggestions recently. Behind the Bar at TMZ.com, and we will talk to you next week.
Love to hear from you.
Thanks for watching. If you want more nerdy deep dives into the legal side of celebrity news, hit our subscribe button right here.
And check out our previous episodes over here.